Welcome back to the Conversations for Change, a podcast by the Nurturing Tomorrow Foundation. Today, we're joined by Patti Barnard, an executive, parent, and advocate with lived experience navigating ADHD, sensory processing disorder, and raising her autistic son, Luke. Patti brings a deeply personal perspective on our invisible struggle, burnout, and what it means to advocate for understanding, both at home and in the workplace. Before we dive in, a quick note. We are not mental health professionals. This podcast is for educational and advocacy purposes only. Everything we share reflects our personal perspectives and lived experiences. If you are struggling or need support, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health provider.
So, Patti, welcome to the podcast. Let's hear a little bit about you and your professional experiences.
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. This is a topic I'm really passionate about, both from a professional perspective and a professional perspective. So thank you. So I spent the last 25 years, and showing my age, but at an executive level, partnering with CEOs and boards, helping to build legal strategies, helping companies grow while staying smart and compliant. I've been in house most of my career, if not all of my career, really till recently. I served as a general counsel, a chief legal officer, chief compliance officer. And as of about a year ago, I'm bringing that same level of support to startups and high growth companies as a fractional general counsel and chief legal officer.
You've seen a lot in your career.
I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot. And it's, this, this topic and, this conversation is so near and dear to me because, yeah, I've seen so much. And even early in my career, from my perspective, I wish I had just known more. I've lived with ADHD, sensory processing disorder, SPD, but I wasn't diagnosed until I was an adult, like most women, because we don't show the same symptoms as boys. So it was really easy to diagnose my eldest son who has ADHD because he just wouldn't stop. It was like he wouldn't stop bouncing off the walls. His grades started to slip, but for girls, we're really not physically hyper when we're young. Most girls, some are. So I feel like our hyperactivity often just lives in our brain. And that's
Mhm.
also just a huge misconception about ADHD in general, because I feel like people think, oh, you have to have that like attention deficit. Every single letter has to check off. You have to be hyper. You have to almost be like, oh, I can't pay attention. And really, we know, it's not that. But, more closely to this conversation, I'm also the mom of an autistic son, Luke, who is 18 now. We had him diagnosed when he was about 4. So I say like the best people to know stuff about this topic are parents, because I've just spent, 14 years more or less, just kind of researching everything I can to help Luke and to understand it better.
Yeah, I'm sure with parenting, especially with if he was diagnosed at 4, I can tell you I was diagnosed in my 30s, but for anybody who has known me for any period of time knows there's that meme that goes around that says like undiagnosed, but something's definitely off. And it was kind of
Yes.
like that with me
Right.
growing up. So I think my mom definitely learned a lot of how to kind of address behaviors differently with different folks. Now, with learning a lot about Luke growing up, and you talked about yourself being diagnosed with ADHD and SPD, did Luke's diagnosis and the items you learned with him growing up, did that kind of make you realize a little bit more about yourself and maybe some things that needed addressing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. To the point where sometimes I've even like looked to see if I was misdiagnosed and perhaps I'm on the spectrum. I mean, to that extent, the biggest one, that I realized because he was doing, and I think, we'll get to that later, was masking, until I saw Luke mask so heavily. And until the doctors explained he was masking, explained the Coke bottle theory, where they hold it together all day. And like a Coke bottle, you shake it and you put it down and it seems fine. But if you take the lid off, what happens? It explodes, right? So a long time ago, one of his specialists told us, that's how it is with neurodivergent children. They're holding it together all day, like that shaken Coke bottle. And yeah, when he gets home, he is going to explode and he is going, everything's going to come out because he's been trying so hard to keep it together all day. And, I started tuning into that more, and I started realizing, well, that's exactly what I've been doing for my whole life. I've been masking, and not realizing it, not wanting to get on camera for a meeting. It hasn't always been vanity. Sure, some days it is vanity. I'm not going to get on without a little bit of makeup, but a lot of the times what people don't see is everything that happened before that call, how overstimulated a person can be. Where getting on camera it just isn't. I mean, it's not productive for them. It makes it harder for them. But yeah, I just think with Luke and with Jake, my oldest, and his ADHD, because like I said, I wasn't diagnosed till I was an adult. So I think
Mhm.
having them both diagnosed, my husband also, we're like a family of ADHD here, and a family of neurodivergent. So you can imagine how fun our house is. But the good thing is, like, we know it, so now we know it,
Mhm.
and knowing, is I was gonna say half the battle, but that again shows my age with the old GI Joe cartoons.
But it
But
kind of is
it
though,
is, it is.
because with my therapist right now, what I'm working on is how to pre-regulate a little bit better, and it kind of ties into what you were talking about with like if you have a day where you have to be on camera all day or more of the day, and you have to have your smile on. You're in the services space, so you need to provide that smile. Everything I have to do all day, and I know if I look at my calendar ahead of time and I see that I'm going to be on camera all day, then I know I can talk to my wife and say, after work, I'm probably not going to be in a great headspace because I need to unwind. And like to your point, I can't mask. I've just masked for 8+ hours. I can't do it anymore. We talked a little bit about you. We talked a little bit about your son, Luke. I love the fun fact you shared around fishing. I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah.
The fun fact you shared, explain it to our listeners.
Sure. So it is a fun fact because I don't think that most people would take me for a saltwater angler. I'm gonna just use the word, even though I'm not that great. But so we live in Tampa. I've lived in Florida my whole life. So the water, the beaches, everything has been a part and ingrained in me, a part of my life. I'm also Cuban, so I'm like I've got island blood in me. That's why I love the water. But yeah, so I met my husband in law school, and I didn't really like fishing back then or know much, even though I did live in Miami. But he turned me on to fishing, and it's just been something that we've shared our whole lives together, our whole marriage. We're coming up on 25 years in January, so we finally got a
Congrats.
boat just this past summer because every bonus, every little bit of money has gone where to the children. And I'm not complaining, but one thing I will say is married couples, put yourself first a little bit more than we did. But anyhow, we finally got the boat this summer. We love getting out there, and yeah. So my biggest catches have been bonnet head sharks. For some reason, I've landed like 3 of them. Yeah,
Wow.
I've gotten baby ones. I've gotten full size bonnet head sharks, which is really fun.
How big are those?
They can get to be about 4 feet, so they're pretty big. They're like a mini hammerhead shark is what they look like.
Wow.
So yeah, I've caught several of those, but like on my bucket list, like the top of my fishing bucket list is a tarpon. I'm
Okay.
still, we're out of tarpon season now. We almost got the boat too late this summer because it ends around August. And also I need to get in a little bit of better shape because that's a lot of work catching a tarpon. So next tarpon season, hopefully I'll be letting you both know that I met my bucket list and I caught that tarpon.
I do think that there is a correlation here with your love for saltwater fishing, and how that compares to navigating the waves of parenting and leadership. Your executive level work, I think, gives you a real 360-degree view of high pressure environments. And I would love to know more about how this has shaped your way to advocate for neurodivergent colleagues.
Realizing my own challenges at work, like I said, I could run like a polished executive all day long, but by the time the day was over, I was out of gas. So that contrast, started to help me realize how much energy masking actually takes. And if I was masking, surely there were
Uh-huh.
more people in the organization, masking the same thing. So, I started to realize and have empathy for not just the neurodivergent individuals at work, but for the people that were supporting them. Because again, for me, it wasn't just my own battles, it was my children too. And, my husband, to some extent, like I said, everyone in this house has some neurodivergency, but, mainly my kids. So like mornings felt like a battle for me, as they do for a lot of neurodivergent people. Getting out the door sometimes is overwhelming. And it's not just because it's the morning, it's the noise, the transition, the rush, the meltdowns. Those don't happen anymore, because he's 18 now and he's kind of grown out of the meltdowns. But when I say the mornings used to have, every other morning was a meltdown. If things weren't a certain way in the morning, if you didn't have that structure, if you didn't have things, his clothes ready or something, it was a meltdown. Mornings were hard. One thing I remember was I once had a supervisor years ago when the boys were younger that was calling me at 7:30 in the morning. Listen, I get it. At an executive level, you're gonna have the calls at 7:30 in the morning from other execs. But what I said to him was, call me at 7 at night and we're good. But 7 in the morning doesn't work for me. And I explained to him, it disrupts the morning, it disrupts all of it. And this is, the collateral effects of that are this, this, and this. All it took was that conversation, which I was nervous about going into. The conversation ended up where he thanked me for teaching, not teaching him, but for making him aware, that when others
Mm.
say mornings are hard,
Wow.
it's not just we're not morning people. It's not just that we're cranky in the mornings. It's sensory load. It's executive function demands. As Sean, like you were saying earlier, when I look at my calendar and I see that I have all these, camera calls the rest of the day, I'm already getting anxious. You know what I mean? And like people don't
Yes.
realize that like the call could be at 4 and at 10 AM, I'm already thinking of the call. I'm thinking, "Oh my gosh, how many hours until I have to get on camera?" And, those are the kind of things that people just don't see. But having experienced it myself and having experienced it through my kids, I started to realize, that sometimes work environments, just like school environments, aren't the best thing.
Something important, I think, as folks listen to this, especially maybe younger listeners that are starting their professional career and working their way up. I think what you talked about, Patty, right there, of just having that conversation with the executive to say, hey, what I need is a little bit different than what you need. And that's super important for neurodivergent, neurotypical, anyone. Like everyone has preferences. Maybe it's someone raising a family and they need to step away right at 5 p.m. so they can feed their child, get them ready for bed. Someone who is neurodivergent or has neurodivergent tendencies and maybe needs to shut off at 5 o'clock and decompress. It's the moment of the day they're looking forward to. Having that conversation, I'll add on to what you said. It seems scary up front, but more times than not, I will say it will probably be fine.
Patty, I would love to know, and I think it's really important to bring your experience to attention here, especially for women, but really for everyone navigating neurodivergency in adulthood. Can you recall a certain moment when when someone finally saw you and what you were carrying and how it changed everything for you, whether it was yourself or someone
That's
else
a
in
great
your
question because
life?
I really think it's been just myself. I mean, aside from my husband, who's known that since the day he met me. Oh, because he knew it from himself. But putting that aside, it's a lonely world. It's a very lonely world. And I don't
Yes.
know maybe because I haven't asked, for whatever reason, I don't know other people that are in my shoes. So sometimes I do feel like I'm on an island, but my own self awareness has also helped me navigate my life, basically. The camera thing was huge for me. Everyone thought it was, oh, it was a joke. Even like at, sales kickoff, I won like least likely to get on camera. Ha ha ha, But what really everyone didn't know was it wasn't just about vanity. It wasn't just that I didn't want to get on camera. It was a lot for me sometimes, It still is a lot for me, but now that I work for myself, the level of pressure's off, first of all, because I know my clients. I know the ones that don't care if I'm on camera. I know the ones that, okay, I'll get on camera, but it's only an hour. You know what I'm saying? So that pressure was off. But just the pressure of knowing that I had to get on camera, or then I was the one that looked like I wasn't engaged, or I was the one that didn't look like the, team player because I wasn't on camera. Or even like I had a colleague once say it looks disrespectful. And to that person I did say, really, well, you know what else is disrespectful? Assuming that somebody isn't getting on camera just because they don't want to put on eyeliner or whatever it is you guys think, comb my hair. So, I just think, Sean, as you were saying, talking to your supervisor, and I think just training leaders, if leaders don't know what's happening, you almost can't blame them for not helping either. Not everybody can pick up on cues that somebody might be neurodivergent. I can because I have it all around me. But somebody who doesn't have it around them or isn't used to it, you look at Luke, and because he's quote unquote high functioning, he doesn't look like anything's wrong with him. You spend 10 to 30 minutes with him, you don't think anything's wrong with him, right? But what everybody doesn't see are all the challenges that we have with him on a daily basis, and again, some of those have subsided because the challenges change. You all know that the challenges change as they get older. When he was younger, the challenges were bigger. The meltdowns were bigger, and that's another thing. As a parent, you have to have thick skin because you're out with, he's always looked older, and he's big, he's a big boy. He's past 6 feet now, but he's always tall, right? So when, we'd be out in public and he's having a meltdown on the ground like a child, and people are like looking and judging, and like people can be so cruel, I mean, so cruel.
Absolutely.
So, so just navigating the challenges at different stages, I think is important. And then when you get to a workforce, while today we have made a lot of strides as a global workforce. And I think, that's another gap that's missing. So when like Luke's in a private school right now that caters to neurodivergence, but when he leaves there and he goes to college, and when he leaves college and he goes to a workforce, that's a huge challenge for him because making that transition is not going to be easy. And they don't have 504 plans in workplaces, right? So you got to almost build your own 504 plan. But that also is scary sometimes because you don't know how the company's going to react. Sure, there's laws out there that protect you, but I know more than anybody else that companies can get around laws, so it is challenging for you to go and ask for help and support. So I think the more proactive companies can be, the more awareness leaders have. So you see someone struggling, you don't have to point it out. And please don't point it out. As a GC, I'm saying don't point it out. But you don't have to point it out, but you have to be aware, and you have to understand, and you have to have empathy.
I am so glad that you've brought this up as someone who recently has just finishing up grad school, really looking into those next steps. I've been through a lot of process lately where I've been applying for jobs, speaking to different companies, and not just for myself, but I really want to ask this for other listeners out there because this has been a conversation I've had with so many people. When is the right time to have that conversation?
I mean, if I'm being completely and honestly candid and I'm taking off every professional hat, I personally wouldn't disclose it at the time I'm applying for jobs. Only not because I feel like we need to hide it, but the reality is that there's still bias out there. There is still bias out there. And, yes,
Hmm.
there are laws, like I said. And yes, companies are supposed to follow the laws and are supposed to not discriminate and use, ATS software that doesn't discriminate. That's another thing. Some of this software nowadays, the AI, it's great. But you got to make sure that whatever vendors, as a company you're using for these ATS, tools, that they're not building a bias because there's lawsuits out there right now, against iSIMS and I want to say Workday. They just came out, that these tools, these ATS tools, like you're saying, where you upload and you do all the questions, they were forming their own bias. The tools themselves, the AI was forming their own bias. So I've challenged my clients to, if you're using these tools, challenge the vendor and ask, what sort of testing have you done on your software to make sure that they're not creating bias? But that aside, the bias is still out there, unfortunately. So I just wouldn't do it at that stage. Once I get the job and I don't feel it's deceitful, I just feel it's reality because, unfortunately, that's the thing is that there's still bias out there. And what people don't understand is like a neurodivergent employee can be one of the best employees you will ever have because they're hardworking. They're so smart, like Luke is so smart and me and my husband are attorneys and I always tell him, you're the smartest one in this house. Like he's so smart that he almost like doesn't know what to do with it almost.
Fair.
And he's a hard worker and he wants to impress. He loves the positive feedback, as most people do. So he's going to make someone a very good employee someday. But the problem with all that is, he doesn't like being on camera. He's not going to want to work in an office 9 to 5 every day. He's going to want some of the support and the accommodations that he should be given. And some of these accommodations are great for everybody, let's be honest, but especially for neurodivergent individuals. And I think there's just a
Absolutely.
stigma out there still. As much awareness as there is, and as many podcasts as there are, and organizations that are helping, there's still a huge stigma out there. I've been around enough executives, and there's not enough empathy from the top. And you lead from the top. A company can only lead from the top. If there's no empathy at the top, it won't trickle down.
I think it also depends to answer your question, Victoria, is like it depends on what your professional goals are too. If you're in a place where you desperately need a job, you're unemployed, you've been laid off, whatever the situation is, yeah, I think I would 100% do what Patty said. I think the other side of the coin is if, and this almost ties perfectly into what you were talking about, Luke being like a great employee one day, is if you remove the mask from the very get-go and the organization loves you for it, that's probably going to be a match made in heaven. Like that is probably the organization the candidate will be the happiest at, will stay the longest at, because to what we were talking about at the beginning, you don't have to mask all day. And then you're not as exhausted at the end of the day. You're not dreading waking up and logging in the morning. So I think it depends on the scenario. It's easier to look for a job when you don't need a job, I guess.
I know we talked a lot about the morning, and I totally understand that. For me, I call it, I need to have a slow morning just today, knowing like this is fun for us, right? Like we want to do this. We're here. This wasn't a meeting, but I had so much anxiety about just really getting on camera and talking. I was up at 5:45 watching some documentary about Shakespeare, and then I went to the Ming Dynasty and just, sitting there, palms sweating, armpits sweating, just like thinking and almost dreading this moment just because I feel like even though this is a space where we're safe and it's a place where we come for conversation, the masking for me never stops. What are ways that you can kind of counteract that, help, kind of come back, ground yourself?
It's been a lot easier for me since I work for myself now. But even with working for myself at the beginning of this, I was still masking, and I was not only masking, but then feeling guilty when I wasn't masking, So like, again, the mornings, a horrible time for me. So I didn't really have to do those hard mornings anymore because I wasn't working for anybody else. I was working for myself. So I could give myself the grace and the leniency. I could even sleep in a little bit more. The other thing too is people don't realize some of us take medicine, and I need to wait for my medicine, my Vyvanse to kick in. I'm sorry. I probably wouldn't have said that publicly even a year ago, but that's the truth, is that I need that Vyvanse, not just to concentrate, for everything, and especially emotional regularity. And people don't understand that because what happens is it's a cycle. If I don't take the Vyvanse, it's not just I can't concentrate, it's I can't function really. And that turns into, then I get on myself. Oh, why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? And then it's self-deprecation. And then it turns into depression. I wish people would understand that I'm not just popping a pill so I can get more work done. It's truly not that. But that's been something I've learned too, is that, my Vyvanse also helps with just regulating my emotions, because emotions are so tied into ADHD and all of it, all of neurodivergency. But specifically for me, it's tied into my ADHD. So where if I'm not functioning well, I self-deprecate and I start questioning, why am I not normal? Why can't I just be like other people? I hate when people say everybody's a little ADHD. No, they're not. They're really not. And until you really learn what ADHD actually is, I hate that it's called ADHD because immediately people just think you're hyper, like I said earlier, and you're running around and, like my oldest, he definitely had that. But, for us women, like I said, it's usually the hyperness is in our brains. My brain never stops, never
Mhm.
stops, never stops.
I used to describe it when I was younger as like I would like try to explain to my mom what was going on and be like, it is so loud in there. It's loud
Mm.
and I'm talking so fast and I cannot slow myself down.
Right, right.
And that inner critic is so, so, so loud.
So, so loud.
But I think as time goes on, and also, I'll be honest, turning 50 is very liberating too, where I'm just like, I don't care. Take me with all my faults or don't take me. But it's easy for me to say this at the stage I am in my life right now, Victoria, where I do work for myself, where I am 50. And as a 50-year-old woman, you just don't care as much. You really don't. It's great. It really is
I
great to
can't
get
wait.
here and be like, take me or leave me.
Seriously, yeah.
But I think it's progress, and I really hope, like with other areas of my life that I'm very much into female empowerment, and those sorts of things and making sure like women succeed way before 50. Women realize way before 50 that you can do it and you have the power and don't let anyone stop you. Same with, neurodivergence. We can do this. We just for so long, people just don't bet on us, and that's why we mask.
It might look different. You might have to support a little bit different. I know what fortunately, I'm a remote employee, but I do have my accommodations for work if I need them. And, one of them is, a quiet space because our office has open seating. And the few times I've been there, it's super distracting. And, I can't focus on anything, even with headphones on, even with my loop earplugs, which tune out some background noise. Like it's still super distracting. Everybody's standing up, moving around. That guy has a bright shirt. That guy's yelling, I think, for some reason. There's all this different stuff. And it's like, so one of my accommodations is I need a quiet space to work from. And like, that's for me. But the open seating doesn't work for everybody. Likewise, a quiet space all by yourself doesn't work for everybody. So I think like spending the extra time, putting the extra effort. And I think this is one of the things that just, if there's any younger people here, especially, or maybe executives listening to this, is like, if you want to be a good leader, take that extra time, spend that extra time, learn about your team, because yes, it's extra time. We're all working a lot of hours. I get it. But I think it's one of those things that is totally worth it. If you can spend the time and learn what makes your team tick, yes, you're spending a little bit more time up front. You're going to get some really good results from them.
Absolutely. I mean, the ROI on knowing your team is huge, because there might be things you're doing that you're hurting the team by not finding out more, or, one example I use, it goes back to my kids, like when my oldest who has ADHD, when he was younger, one teacher, tried to withhold recess from him as a punishment. Listen, I get why she was punishing him, but what I told her was, you're punishing yourself. He needs to get out and run. Like taking recess away from Jake is the worst thing for the entire classroom. He needs to be out there running. And that little change, she didn't even think of it. That's the other thing, when teachers aren't aware, teachers need awareness too, but more teachers are aware than employers. But that one little change made such a difference for her because she's like, you're right, the afternoons are going much better because he's let out some of that energy. So sometimes the same thing in a workplace. Someone might have to get up and take a walk 2 or 3 times a day. It doesn't mean that they're lazy. It doesn't mean they're trying not to work. If the work's getting done, honestly, what do you care how they're doing it? If the work isn't getting done, that's a conversation to be had too. But if the work's getting done, why should we care about anybody's accommodations?
If you feel the need to do something a little bit different than what you see with your peers, just ask. I think similar to what you did with asking about, can we not talk at 7 a.m. or 7:30 in the morning? Similarly, just ask. I think there will be a lot of instances where supervisors, managers will give a chance and be like, okay, let's see. And it's, to your point, the results that speak. And if you do things a little bit different, There might be some hesitation, there might be some questions up front. It's not necessarily always from a bad place. Sometimes it is, admittedly, but sometimes it's just that person trying to understand.
Patty, I would like to redirect back to what we were talking about earlier. You had mentioned neurodivergency, how it can be a lonely place. Being unique can be lonely, right? Being a parent can be lonely. Sometimes I describe it as a island of one, village of none.
Yeah,
So
true.
with with that, and parenting, I think that out there right now, maybe people listening, myself included, there's a lot of noise going on around autism and neurodivergency. And I bet there are a lot of parents questioning out there whether their son is 3 years old like mine or 18-year-old like Luke. Where to begin? If they're sitting there, they're questioning things, where to start, if you can kind of take us back through your experience.
Luke was in preschool and really like his teachers, he was at a small church school. So we were lucky that his teachers could talk to us candidly. They started picking up what we were thinking was maybe OCD tendencies. He knew the numbers at 4. He knew every child's like number, cubby number. And then he also knew how to write numbers. When I tell you genius, he's always been so smart. He would write the numbers and then he would line them up at 4, So it was like, but still, I didn't know anything about autism, or at the time, really, when he got diagnosed, they diagnosed him with Asperger's, which they don't, they've changed it all to ASD now. But at the time, I didn't know anything about it, So we thought maybe a little OCD, something. We took him to the doctor, and sure enough, they diagnosed him with Asperger's. And from that moment on, it was just a matter of diving into researching. After his diagnosis, he went to a specialist with Florida Hospital for the longest time. He was on medication. The medication for Luke really didn't do anything, to be honest. So we took him off the medication. Just awareness. And then, like I said, starting to teach his teachers. He was at one elementary school in Orlando, was wonderful. When we moved to Tampa, I can't say the same thing about the elementary school he went to here. It felt like nobody knew how to deal with his challenges. They weren't very sympathetic or empathetic at all. From there, that's where we decided for middle school and on, he's going to go to a private school that has neurodivergent children, that the teachers are trained. So we did that, and that's been a world of help. So again, it depends on the school, it depends on the teachers, it depends on the teachers that want to help, and it depends on the parents. If I have any advice for parents that don't have neurodivergent children is don't exclude them. Don't exclude them, because again, I could cry. Luke got excluded from one party where then he found out, and he was still in elementary school, and it broke his heart, and he couldn't look. I almost can't talk about it.
I'm gonna
He
start
couldn't,
crying.
yeah,
No,
like he
seriously.
couldn't understand
So sad.
why, and I just finally was like, listen, Luke, everybody, maybe they didn't, I made excuses. He was too little to be like, the parents are assholes. But that stuck with me forever, where like, if you're going to pass out invitations in a classroom, don't exclude kids, because you know what? Already the kids are cruel. They're not being taught. They're really not, and I think the parents help, like teaching and the awareness needs to come at home too, because then they'll know how to interact with children that may seem different or may seem weird. I hate that word, but I'm saying at that age, that's what other kids are perceiving. I figured out, like, I had to find, mom groups that understood this, mom groups that knew that when Luke was off by himself, like one friend told me, but is he happy? Because I was always feeling bad, because I'm like, but he's, why won't he play with the other kids? And she's like, but look at him. He's happy, right? And I'm like, oh, he's smiling. Yeah. And she's like, if he's happy, we don't have to understand it. And that changed my perception. So surrounding yourself, Victoria, with people and other parents that get it, that support not only your children, but support you, is huge.
I absolutely love this. I feel like as a parent myself, if I see a shift in my son's, we'll say, behavior or just demeanor, I don't automatically think, what is wrong with him? I think, what's going on with me? Look to the parents. I think Ice Cube said it best himself. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. You know what I mean? Like, if there is something going on with my son, he's 3, he's a child. I have to, all right, what's going on with me? You know? what
Yeah.
is going on with me, and that self,
Yeah.
looking to the self for that. And I think that through that, I have come to such a place of discovery and peace within me. I learned it's so I love that you recognize, like, without knowing your husband, or really even before having this conversation with you, I was super excited because I was like, this is an intelligent, badass lady, and I'm so ready to meet her. But I truly believe you, and I don't think it's a parent's bias when you talk about how smart Luke is, and the wonder of, that it's an amazing thing. And I think as parents, we can only hope for that our children will outshine us, will be smarter than us. Like, that's what I strive for, and I don't tell them this, but I think it a lot. I look at them like, like, right now I'm giving you a lot of guidance, buddy, but one day you're gonna be so much smarter than me, and, like, I think that, and I want that. I want that for him and for me.
And he'll have that because of your awareness, and because you're advocating for him. And unfortunately, my father-in-law, I have zero doubt that he was autistic. Zero doubt. Same thing, a genius. Like, he was an ER doctor. He would be mad if every time he had to take his boards, he wouldn't score a perfect score, So when I say smart, but he was never diagnosed, he was never diagnosed. They used to think that back then it was a mental thing. They were locked away, neurodivergence wasn't a thing that people even thought of. But here we are now where, if Luke has children, or, I have grandchildren with my other son, like, if any future children have autism or ADHD, then my boys, I know that they've been trained up to spot it and to deal with it and to be empathetic about it. And the other thing, Victoria, that I didn't say before was also understanding when your child's had enough. I can't tell you the number of vacations, unfortunately, when the boys were younger, that just mainly me try to force, even though the doctors would tell me vacations and outings are never going to look typical for you and you're going to have to just accept that, but I would try to force it and be like, no, we're going to have this happy time and it's going to be okay. Undoubtedly, almost every time there'd be a meltdown, there'd be something, because Luke and Jake, but since we're focusing on Luke, he'd had enough. He'd had enough, like, he can't spend the whole day at a theme park like my oldest can, So we started realizing that and saying, okay, we're going to take Luke back to the hotel and one of us will take him, let him rest, let him go to the pool, let him do whatever. But it doesn't all have to look the same. And that was a really hard one for me. My husband would tell me and I'd be like, no, but I'm just going to keep trying, because I wanted it to look normal. But unfortunately, it never was and never has.
To the parents of children that have maybe neurodivergent children in their classes or whatever, I just want to say those neurodivergent children, I'm not saying anything against neurotypical children or neurotypical people, but neurodivergent children or adults will be some of the best friends that anybody can ever have. And, as an adult, I have a group of friends that are neurodivergent, diagnosed or not. And we would, if one of them called right now and said, Sean, something happened, I need you, like, I would end this podcast. I would leave. I'm in the middle of nowhere, New York. I don't even know where the closest airport is. I would find it. I would buy my ticket. I would be on a plane over to them right now. And I feel the same for most of that group, would do the same for me. And, like, yes, we might be a little quirky sometimes. We might not say exactly the same thing as all the other people, but, like, we will be some of the best friends you can have, similar to what we were talking about with the workplace. If you give us a chance, work with us, we'll be some of the best employees. We will stay with you forever. We will deliver the best quality work. We will be there to, not just professionally, but, like, if you need something personally, we may not always know how to react to it or know exactly what to say because emotions are hard, but we will try. Genuinely.
It's such a great point you brought up, because I think there's such a big misconception about, autistic kids, adults, individuals not having empathy. And it's so wrong. Like, Luke completely changed how I think about that, because he's actually one of the most empathetic people that I know. Like, he really feels things so deeply for others, sometimes more than anyone around him, really. Like I say, out of the four of us, again, he's the smartest and probably most empathetic. But what I've learned from him is, like, empathy doesn't always show up the way like society thinks it's going to show up. He doesn't lack empathy. He has so much sometimes that I think it overwhelms him.
I think something common is that like neurodivergent I'm just going to speak to myself. I'm very direct, but I've been told for a long time I carry the weight of the world on my shoulders, right? But I'm not going to cherry pick, sugarcoat, like let's get to the point. I'm upset. So I think that sometimes that comes off as rash and not caring, but no, it's like actually like I care so much. I got to get it
Yes.
out there. I got to like
Yes.
we got to get this done. I got to help. I have to do it like ride or die. I am there, and to a fault. And that sometimes backfires in my face and, and
To a
others.
fault, like you said, because I've had to also tell Luke, watch yourself because like me, I'm like you, Victoria, and what you see is what you get. I
Uh-huh.
don't do fake and, I'm not going to do fake. So if
Yeah.
I'm genuinely caring about you or have empathy for you, it is real. And what happens in my life, and this is something I am learning, is that people aren't going to always give that back to me
Mm-mm.
and they have it, and that's been a really hard lesson for me because again, it's very limited. I don't give my caring and my empathy to everybody. So when I'm giving it to you, I always expect it back because I just think it's, if I'm naturally like that, everyone else is, but they're not. So I'm now late in life learning, and I have said this to Luke because it's hard, for him to distinguish what's real and not real. He's so real and cut and dry.
Okay.
Everything's black and white, good or bad. He's gonna tell you. Sometimes I even am like, "Does this outfit look good?" Because I know he will tell
I'll
me the
tell
truth.
you. A fact.
He will be like, "Well, I don't wanna hurt your feelings, mom, but no." You know what I mean? And I'm like, "You didn't hurt my feelings. Thank you."
And empathy is a really interesting thing with neurodivergent folks because and you touched on I think all of it, Patty, but just to add on is like neurodivergent folks are empathetic to a fault and it's genuine.
We talked about school and how the best thing, like when Luke made that transition into a private school and the accommodations there. So I want to talk about when people are in more rural areas where there's not a private schools within a distance from them, or if they do not have access to private schools. What advice would you have for those people to advocate for their children in terms of who's going to be their first line of defense in terms of resources? And I know that's going to vary state to state, but just where do they start?
So definitely as a parent, try to get, depending on the state, a 504 plan or an IEP, whatever it is that your state has, get that into place first and foremost. Some schools will follow it to a T, some may or may not, but it's there. So you can always refer back to it and you can always point out to the school, it's there, when you do need to follow it. So I would start there. I would, definitely talk to the teachers. Like I said, make sure your teachers know your child, know that punishing them by taking recess away, not good. They have to regulate, they have to focus, they have to reset. Talking to the teachers about allowing some sensory breaks, quiet time for your kid. If they get overstimulated, a simple little, here's a book, go sit in the corner for a little bit. Use multiple ways of teaching. So Luke didn't do good with homework. It wasn't a lazy thing. It wasn't even a lazy parenting thing. Maybe a little, but it wasn't like a Luke lazy thing. It was that going back to that Coke bottle theory, it was that by the time Luke got home from school, he had enough. He just couldn't do anymore. So part of his 504 plan was he's not going to do homework. He was smart enough. He didn't need the homework. His grades, he's always gotten straight A's. So make sure that whatever your plan is for your child, it's meeting your child's support, not just a general. Don't let the teacher set the plan. Talk to your doctor, like when we did our 504 plan and our IEP, I think we've had both. We took it to the doctor and we had the doctor help us, write it out so that we weren't leaving it up to the school administration to do it because they don't know your child. And then again, I just think parents, the parent advocacy and also just the parent support. And also I tried as much, even being a working parent, I tried or my husband would be there, where there were parties or field trips or stuff like that, where you can also be there for your child and support them through that. Because sitting in a classroom and a field trip are two completely different things. And like I said, Luke had a lot of sensory overload. So a field trip for him wasn't always fun. And again, if you see a child having a meltdown, don't assume, they're spoiled or they're misbehaving. I mean, he's taught me that too, that meltdowns aren't weaknesses. They're communication. They're communication for a neurodivergent child. A
It's
meltdown
their
is
way
like,
of saying help. Like,
help. I've hit my
Yes.
limit. Help. Yeah. It doesn't mean they lack strength. It means they've been strong for too long. That's what it
yes.
means, and they're crying out for help. And when they're little, they don't understand that they're different. They don't know they're different. So they just know that their body and their brains are telling them, I'm done. Help.
And I love that you've brought in the Coke bottle analogy to that because I think that is such a great visual way to explain and for people to really understand how it feels like. And I think something that we should all be aware of, whether we're neurotypical, neurodivergent, if we have someone especially neurodivergent or autistic in our life, to consider that and think about what the day has been. Because I know sometimes I'll speak for myself personally. I've masked all day. I've put on all day. And then when it comes to the time where I'm with my family, my son and my husband, the two people I love the most in this world, I have nothing left. I have nothing left for you. And so I think that, is the same for me. I noticed that about Aiden, when I pick him up, I'm also very fortunate to right now he goes to a church preschool. So it's a small community. We get to really, hear about what's going on, talk to the parents. But I can tell for those first couple hours when he gets home, he's done. He's spent. He's overstimulated. He needs to decompress. And so I think that if we all just like keep that awareness on the forefront, because I feel like there's a saying that it's like, you're always the worst to the ones you love or something like that. Well, that's like a really shitty saying, you know what I mean? And that's not true. It's just not true.
And it's not like sometimes it is true,
Right.
unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. I love it. Yeah. So, okay. All
But
right.
we don't want it to be true though. That's the thing. And like I genuinely feel bad for my wife sometimes because it's then the cycle where we're beating ourselves up for it because
Yes.
I just masked all day long. I don't have it in the evening. So when my wife is like, "Can we go out to dinner?" and it's a place that might have like a 35-minute wait or something like that. Like,
Nope.
I'm sorry. I can't. I just
Right.
can't.
I
I
just
know you
can't.
want to. I
Right.
can't. And then even if she's like, okay, well, I thought it was, at least worth asking. Oh, well, she just said it's worth asking. Like the way she said that almost sounded like she was
Yeah.
disappointed. Now I disappointed her. Maybe I should suck it up and just be mad. But okay, then, there's that whole spoon analogy. If I'm already out of spoons at that point and I'm going into the deficit, then it's not going to be good when I get home. And
You
then
certainly don't want to poke her with a fork.
it's bad and it's just but then I might poke myself because then I'm stimming and because
Right.
then it
Yeah.
turns into the whole like then I look like a disruptive adult sitting there having my tantrum.
People need to respect other people's needs and not get offended by everything. Okay. Because chances are they're not trying to offend you. They never are. It's what they need. You're the one offending by not respecting that.
And that applies neurodivergent, neurotypical. That's another one of those things. And I get it. Sometimes it will be hard. Sometimes it won't be natural. Sometimes all you can do is try. But at least for neurodivergent folks, the neurodivergent folks will notice that you're at least trying to respect it, even if it's not flawless.
I like when I say it's a lonely world, it is a lonely world. And I do sometimes feel like I'm on an island and I'm grateful that I have my husband that understands it too and understands it from also because he understands me, because again, it's a lonely world sometimes having ADHD and it's a much more complex, I don't know, diagnosis, however you want to say. I don't find it a disability, but it's much more complex than people realize. And
Mm.
it affects much
Hmm.
more of a person's life and your relationships. I'm always interrupting, and he like finally I'm like, well, because you do it too, first of all, and it's an AD thing, like, and we're always like we're gonna start recording each other, but like it's nice to have awareness also because without your own self-awareness you can't also teach people to accept you.
If so many people are masking, if everyone's putting on that, corporate face, let's go back to LinkedIn. Everybody's putting on that corporate face. Like then everybody else is going to be putting on that corporate face, and more people are going to be putting on that corporate face. And those folks that just don't feel comfortable are going to mask more and more and more. And I think, like, I remember the first when I posted my autism diagnosis on LinkedIn, like, I was scared because, like, my network was not, at least at face value, was not that. And then I did it, and I'm like, I have connected with some of the most genuine, nice, caring people that, like, no offense to a lot of folks on LinkedIn, I didn't know existed on LinkedIn.
I do see a trend on LinkedIn where I think in various ways people are starting to be a little more real and start putting themselves and their families and their mental health and physical health as priorities. I see a slight trend going that way, and I'm really hoping it continues, because if we don't advocate for ourselves, no one's going to advocate for us, and that's for everybody across the board.
Let me close out this episode of Conversations for Change by saying, Patti, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. If anybody listening or watching this podcast would like to connect with Patti, we will put the link to her LinkedIn in the description. Patti is a fractional general counsel, so you can learn a little bit about that on her LinkedIn. Patti was recently a podcast guest on the Legal Disruptors Spotlight. So she has a clip of that on her page talking about AI in the legal space. And as an AI fan, I think that's super cool. I did listen to that clip, and she has a lot of other great stuff, talks about a lot of great stuff on there. So please connect with Patti on LinkedIn. As always, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter on nurturingtomorrow.org. Subscribe to the podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and probably a bunch of others that I'm unaware of because I'm getting to the boomer stage of my life. So thank you for listening to today's podcast episode, and we look forward to connecting with you all on the next one.